This is the Comics Alternative, the world's smartest comics podcast, episode 307, a publisher spotlight on Glom Press. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Sturge, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode, we have another publisher spotlight, this one on Glom Press out of Australia. But before we get to that discussion, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by those good folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be anywhere from 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable, mind-blowing specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off of cover, but every now and again you can find discounts that go higher than that.
That's right, Derek. And if you go now, you can find plenty of bundles where you get 50% off of many of the major publishers, including Vertigo and Valiant and Marvel and DC.
That's right. You know, you really can't go wrong with the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. They will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your books there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
And that's the truth. How's that? Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah.
How's that? I'm trying to come up with something pithy there.
Yeah, kind of a catchphrase that you can use every week.
That's right. I'll just rip off an old catchphrase from somebody else.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, Charlie.
And then another week you can go dynamite.
Hey, that's a good one. I'm writing that down.
And then another one, looking good.
Suck it to me.
Jeez. In fact, some of our younger listeners may not know what we're referring to. By the way, in order was JJ from Good Times.
That's right.
Chico and the Man, and Laugh-In.
Laugh-In. See, yeah. I think maybe in order, reverse chronological order.
That's right. Well, Sturge, this week we're doing something we like to do every now and again, and that is a Publisher Spotlight episode. And this one is going to be devoted to an Australian press called Glom Press. But before we get to a discussion of Glom and its 2018 releases, because we're going to be looking at everything that they published last year, let's talk about a couple things, or at least one thing that has been in the news over the past 2 or 3 days that deals with comics. And now, I wasn't aware of this, but last week, I think, Sturge, as fate would have it, you pointed out to me that Bill Maher put out some tweet back in the late fall, right around the time of Stan Lee's death, right?
That's right. And basically he said, or tweeted, he did not say it. He typed that, people are fixated. Basically, people are fixated on these comic books, and that's kind of the problem with the country. And we deserve having elected Trump because of it, basically. Because, I think that was the leap, is that, we're a country of babies. So we elected the biggest baby there is.
Wow. So he made the leap from Stan Lee's death to the election of Trump. That's
exactly true.
Well, it was weird that you told me this last week, because on Friday night's Real Time on HBO, Real Time with Bill Maher, I was watching that, and, at the end of his show, he does New Rule, where he goes through like a whole series of observations and then usually uses that last observation for a more extended editorial. In many ways, it is an editorial. And so this extended editorial that was part of New Rule was about the reaction to his tweet on Stan Lee. And, he doubled down and defended what he was saying. He said in no way whatsoever was I saying anything positive or saying that I was glad that Stan Lee was died. I wasn't talking about Stan Lee at all. I was talking about the problem of adults who basically act like kids by remaining in a world of superherodom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's pervasive in the culture. There's no arguing that. I mean, all the films and, people dressing as things and, you go to the stores and you see, those Marvel movies are everywhere. Yeah. And the DC stuff maybe to a lesser extent, but, the TV shows and fandom in general. I don't know. Yeah. And I think it kind of also gets swept into, the millennial discussion, which, I think that there's a lot of heaping on of a certain perceived generation, like they won't grow up for some reason. And I don't think any of it is, well found. In my mind, it's not. It's just griping in some ways. Yeah,
and it rubs him the wrong way. And God bless him if that's the way he goes, then fine. Right. I have nothing against that. But then again, like you, I have no problem with this kind of emphasis on, let's say, superhero culture, people wearing the clothes and acting out and whatnot. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not what got me. The thing that got me, and the thing I wanted to just maybe discuss for a couple of minutes, is the fact that there is a gigantic hole in his argument. Okay.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Even if you agree with him about the infantilization, so to speak, of many of the adult population, primarily around things like superheroes, video games, and whatnot. When he talks about comics, the only thing he talks about is superheroes.
Right.
And that's what bugged me the most about his gripe or his editorial on New Rule this past weekend. It's because he has such a limited view of comics, which in many ways doesn't surprise me because most people, especially who know nothing about comics, equate comics and superheroes, which is definitely not the case.
Right.
And, especially, those of us on the comics alternative know this. And this is what this show is all about.
I was going to say, it's our mission statement.
Exactly. It's our mission statement. So maybe we should let Bill Maher know something about the comics alternative and say, hey, we're not saying that it's Shakespeare or it's Melville, but it's a lot more than superheroes.
Sure. And I would argue some of them are Shakespeare or Melville. My favorite thing is Monsters. That's a hard book to kind of wrap your head around and not contend with as like a major piece of literature in my head.
Right. You know what else isn't Shakespeare and Melville? A variety of films and paintings and architecture. Again, it's a completely different medium. And so by trying to equate one and the other, and I can see where some people who are big superhero fans who know various narrative storylines, arcs, and whatnot inside and out may argue that it's their Shakespeare, right? It's their Hawthorne, and that's fine. That there's nothing wrong with that. But to me, one of the biggest problem with his argument is the fact that he just equates comics and superheroes.
Sure.
But again, that doesn't surprise me because most people do, and
especially in America.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, overseas, it's going to be different.
Right.
But anyway, we're sorry, Bill Maher. You just didn't get it right. You don't know what you're talking about.
Nope. Well, he's just misinformed. Maybe we can get him to listen. I'll tweet this at him, and maybe he'll listen to it and say, oh, maybe I'll read something that's actually not a superhero comic and say something different.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my hope. I don't know. There's a part of me that's just, it's a controversy. It's gotten traction. His media people or publicists probably like, hey, this tweet's getting a lot, so why don't we just stir that pot a little bit more? But who knows?
Okay, let's go ahead and begin our discussion of Glom Press and its 2018 releases. Mm-hmm. And You know, this is a press. I don't know about you, Sturge, but I didn't know existed until this past December.
I'm in the same boat as you, and I'll add something else. I mean, this is a kind of press that, I mean, something like Bill Maher talking about like this, he needs to see something like this. I mean, this variety of books we're talking about, I mean, there's not a superhero to be seen, and the topics and the characters and all the different genres and formats. I mean, these things kind of speak to a certain range of comics that are not for kids. And I definitely didn't feel talked down to in any way, shape, or form reading these books.
I know. Now, I said I didn't know about it before December. So how do we come to do a Glom Press spotlight? And by the way, it's spelled Glom, Glom. Glom Press. And the reason we're doing this, and the reason we found out about this, is through a response from a listener. And I think this is the first time that this has ever happened, where a listener has suggested that we do a specific publisher spotlight. And in fact, and I'm going to get the name completely wrong, it is Vosten Dram Ming Amigo Yoten Go Libros. That's his name on Instagram. Okay. Or at least that's the name he uses on Instagram. And he was responding back in late December to one of our postings there, one of our shows. And he said, I really like what you guys do when it comes to your various publisher spotlights, especially when you look at very small presses. He said, had you ever considered doing something on Glom Press out of Australia? I had no idea what Glom Press was. So I looked it up, saw what they did, and then got in touch with the two people behind Glom Press, Mark Pearson and Michael Hawkins, and asked them about the possibility of doing a spotlight maybe on their 2018 releases, because with a really small press like this, looking at an entire year's release is not as much of a problem as, let's say, with a larger press. So, for instance, if we did a publisher spotlight on Drawn and Quarterly, we'd have to look at maybe a season, right? Or at least part of a season. But with something like Glom Press, I think it's definitely doable. And of course, we'll see if this show is doable. And so anyway, I got in touch with Mark and Michael, and they have gladly said, yeah, we'll help you in any way we can. So I want to thank the listener. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name again on Instagram. If you're listening to this, you know who you are. And it's because of you that this episode has come into existence. And we also want to thank the publishers of Glom, Mark Pearson and Michael Hawkins. Now, if you want to find out more about Glom, go to glompress.com. That's one word, glompress.com. They are a risograph printer and comics publisher, and they're based out of Melbourne, Australia. And so they do a lot of work, not only with comics and zines, but with other kinds of art and posters.
Yeah, and they seem to have, I mean, I think in all of them it said something like limited to 300 or something. So they're very kind of like small print runs, relatively speaking. So, I feel glad to have read as much of that output as out there. And I don't know if they do digital. I mean, that would strike me as something that would be a good thing to check out. One of the things I noticed is that, they're a risograph printer, right? Right. And so most of the comics that we're going to be discussing have been printed in risograph. And one of the things that Mark did when he got in touch with us and started to provide us with material, and they're over in Australia, so the easiest thing would be to provide PDFs of his various publications, which he did. Thank you very much. Sure. And I noticed that with many of the PDFs, they were like scans of prints, risograph printings, which has to be the case, right? Because when you print in a risograph manner, that's the only way, I would guess, that you can generate digital copies. Yeah, I would think so. But I don't know. Maybe it's something to think about. I'm just throwing it out there because I really like these books, and I'd like them to get in as many hands as possible. Yeah. And we're going to be looking at 9 books, actually 10, but 9 of them are from 2018, from last year.
we weren't able to arrange any kind of brief interview with Mark and or Michael to kind of introduce Glom Press to the audience. But one of the things that Mark wanted me to mention is that they're not going to be publishing anything in 2019, but in 2020, they plan on putting out 6 new books. Also,
wow.
So we can look forward to that. Mark also told me that that there are going to be new comics from both him and his colleague Michael coming out, and he said something about. He said they're going to be at SPX or try to be at SPX, CXC, and Mice in 2019. So, I probably won't go to CXC or Mice, but I'll try to make it to SPX again. So, Mark and Michael, I hope you're able to make it because I'd very much love to meet you.
Well, one day I'll make it to SPX, but I'll be eager to hear what your report from meeting them. How's that?
Well, maybe you can go this year.
I will do it's in May.
No. It's September, mid-September.
Oh, September. Oh, well, that might be doable then.
Yeah. We thank again Mark and Michael for providing what they provided. Now, the 9 books that they released in 2018 are, and I'm going to go ahead and go over the titles and the authors.
Okay.
And then during the course of this episode, you and I can just kind of in a free-flowing way talk about like one and then the other.
Sure.
But this is a list of the books that came out last year. Guidebook to Queer Jewish Spirituality by Mira Schlossberg. The Claw, The Terrible, Beautiful Claw by Mark Pearson. Saliva Tide by Michael Hawkins. Galapagos by Mandy Ord. Sexy Female Murderesses, Eloise Grills. Mystical Cowboy number 4 by Aaron Billings. Swimsuit, Rachel Ang. My Big Life by Bailey Sharp. And then finally, Psychic Hotline, Leonie Braley.
Yeah, and listeners, I know Derek's very good about listing everything in the show notes, so you can find each individual title there and author.
Yeah, exactly. Now, getting the books may not be as easy, at least for some, as they may normally be. One of the things that I did was I did a search on Amazon, and as I kind of expected, no Glom Press publications are available through that. However, if you go to their website, again, glompress.com, you'll find that they also have a store. And so everything that we're going to be discussing, with one exception, is still available.
That's right. And they do ship internationally for cheap rates, they say.
Yeah, so there you go. So definitely go to glompress.com, and if you click on shop, then you'll be taken to their Store Envy site. So you can get your texts that way. And, the ones that we're talking about and others.
Oh, yeah. Then we're good. We'll dive into them. There's plenty of interesting things to pick up and read. So I'm going to just recommend on the front end and the back end. Check out their site.
Okay. Now, this is, before we just jump into the text, this is your first publisher spotlight, isn't it?
That's true. That's true. So I will do my best to keep up.
Publisher spotlight virgin.
Hey, no more.
We'll be gentle.
I know, it's like Rocky Horror. I'm holding a balloon between my legs as we speak.
Okay, so a lot of interesting titles here. God, where do we begin? Let's start this way. Sturge, what is one text that struck you as quite unusual? I mean, there are a number of unusual ones here in one form or another, but which one struck you as, curious? I hadn't thought of that before.
That's a good question. I mean, they're all kind of unique and interesting and different. How about, which one? Let's go with, I know, see, this is, you put me on the spot with this one. Things are all over the place. How about we start with the Mystical Boy Scout? Because that one, I thought, that's the first one. Actually, it's the second one I read. And that one it was very interesting. Everything about it was interesting to me. And
okay, yeah. So, and this is by Aaron Billings again.
That's right, by Aaron Billings.
And apparently, this is the fourth issue or the fourth manifestation of Mystical Boy Scout, because Aaron writes the very beginning of this issue that it started as something that he, I think, self-published, and then the third issue came out in another manner, and now this is the fourth manifestation, or the fourth, I guess, way of printing that he's come out with. So,
and that's what I wondered, if it was the fourth, like this was kind of a compilation of things, because after reading the introduction, I thought, okay, I'm going to be lost, but it starts out with an origin. And as soon as it did that, I thought it flowed, fairly well. I didn't feel lost. I just thought it was like a really interesting, it starts out with a, I liked how it was kind of set up in a, almost like chapters, and, it says origin, and there's like a Greek vase looking image with, it's a person that's on fire with arrows sticking out of their back, and
their back or their butt.
Yes. Yeah. Or maybe both. There's a couple. But then, it starts with kind of like it looks like a witch burning. They burnt us, it says, and there's a couple images of, bodies kind of under kindling or on top of kindling, and, they're clearly being burned. And then, there's a small person there watching, and talks about how they burned us, but then they found better ways to hide. And then as it goes, it's like a interesting kind of, it's a character called the Mystical Boy Scout. It's kind of in the title. But his if he has a superpower, he's got the greatest capacity for anal sex is his superpower, which is not something I was like, this is not, I want Bill Maher to read this book and be like, this is a superhero. This is not a superhero book. This is something else. But the Mystical Boy Scout's kind of like a gay mystical guardian that looks out for people and in a funny way.
Right. And that's why we get in the origin story that you referred to.
Right. But his intention is to kind of make sure that gay people have affordable and appropriate housing, which is an interesting mission statement to have for, kind of a mystical being. Exactly.
So basically what you have in this issue of Mystical Boy Scout is the Mystical Boy Scout hanging out with a friend, or I guess a couple of friends. And then there is a maid involved. And then there is what's she called? The cigarette angel, the cigarette spirit.
What is she? She's Smokey. Her name is Smokey.
Yeah, that's right.
Smokey she gives out cigarettes.
Right. And so it's weird. It's wild. And so what happens is with his friend, and what is his friend's name? I can't remember, but with the Mystical Boy Scout's friend whose house that he's in, I guess the owner of the property is coming over to inspect it, and the friend feels that he is going to be thrown out. And then, so what transpires in this issue is Mystical Boy Scouts' various attempts to make sure that, he does keep the place.
Right. Kind of to thwart the building inspector and, the landlord, basically. The landlord's going to come in and try to find any excuse to throw people out.
That's right. Yeah. And it gets weird. And the thing about the superintendent, the owner of the building, he seems to be made of smoke himself, or I guess he's a cloud.
Right.
Yeah.
It's called Cloudy.
Cloudy. Yeah. So we have Smokey and we have Cloudy.
That's right. And you have Pinky. Pinky is, I think Pinky's the maid.
Yeah. And then Henry is the chicken. There's a chicken involved.
There's a chicken.
Yeah. It gets really wild.
It does. It's kind of surreal, and there's lots of things. I mean, and I love the Smokey. Smokey the cigarette. Is she a cigarette witch? What is she? She's a cigarette being, a cigarette spirit. That's what she is.
Yeah.
And she gives people free cigarettes.
Yeah, and she comes into being because the maid is vacuuming in, I can't remember what the room is, but anyway, she's vacuuming, knocks over
the ashtray.
Something, or knocks something into the ashtray, and then all of a sudden that releases Smokey.
Right.
The cigarette spirit.
And who arrives and says, "It's Smokey, bitch," because she calls everybody bitch.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There was just a whole. I mean, what I liked about it, there's just this whole like kind of surreal sensibility to it, but it had a kind of internal logic, and I loved just the tone and the it was like I don't know. It was kind of irreverent and silly, but at the same time, like dealing with something that is somewhat discrimination against a certain population,
right?
But,
exactly.
There was like these mystical aspects to it that made it kind of fun. And there's lots of weird humping and crystals coming out of butts and all kinds of things. I mean, this book has a lot going on.
Yeah, it does. And I don't want to say that every publication that we're going to be discussing is as wild and freewheeling as this.
Right.
Although I will say that there's something about a small press like this that allows a creator to let loose in ways that she or he couldn't.
Oh yeah.
Through other means, even in other small presses that maybe have a more established feel to them. So for instance, I don't imagine seeing anything like this being published by Gary Groth at Fantagraphics.
No, I would say not. It goes a little bit far. Maybe I think the farthest I've seen from them is what's that called? The Hex, the one with the witch and the owl and the cat.
Oh, Simon.
Hanselman.
Yeah.
What's that called? Hex. It's something Hex. Mega Hex. That's one. It's something like in that vein, but this goes a little bit. I mean, there's clouds. There's lots of penises in this and butts. and smoking. I mean, there's not a lot of smoking in U.S. comics anymore. Not that I'm advocating
except
smoking.
in noir.
That's right. In noir, right? Because everyone smokes in that. But there's just so many. There's the cigarette brand is Laika, like the Russian or cosmonaut dog,
right?
And then at some point at the end, I hope I'm not, but they unleash the spirit of Laika. And Cloudy's like, "Oh no, inside pets, this is a violation." But Laika kind of sucks Cloudy up. And because she's a good girl forever.
I think this is one of the best examples of the text, at least that Glom published in 2018, that just really lets loose and goes in whatever direction the creator is thinking at the time. I mean, there are other examples of this, and we'll get to those in a second, but I think this is the best example. So I think this is a good one to start off with, especially since I ask you, which do you think is the wildest one?
Yeah, and I mean, it's just freewheeling, like you said. It's funny, it's profane, I was super entertained by it. It's the second one I read because I just read them kind of in the order that I downloaded them. And so the first one I read was the one about the Flamingo Diamond. Is it Ray Raymond and the Flamingo Diamond? Mm-hmm. Raymond Ray, sorry, and the Flamingo Diamond. But I read that one, and that one's got its quirks, but it's not. And I read this one. I was like, oh, what did I sign up for? But in an excited way, because I was like, these are going to be just way out there nutso. But it was funny and strange, and I really enjoyed reading this.
Now, you mentioned the Flamingo Diamond and the Claw. So let's go ahead and transition into that. And,
sure.
As we mentioned, one of the publishers of Glom, Mark Pearson, is the author of the Claw. And one of the things that Mark sent us, and the Claw came out in, I think, spring of last year, but he also sent us the first book in this series, the Flamingo Diamond series, and the title is The Flamingo Diamond. And this came out in 2017. And Mark sent this in order to give us some context.
Right. I appreciated that.
Right, exactly. Because I think if I had just started reading The Claw on its own, without having had or having read the Flamingo Diamond, I'd be a little lost. But this is a fascinating series in that you have a guy by the name of Raymond Ray who's on his way to see his daughter. And so in the Flamingo Diamond, and again, this title was released in 2017.
Right.
It's the first in the series. He meets a friend on the train, and most of the narrative takes place on the train. And once he and his friend get to their destination, the daughter, Raymond Ray's daughter, picks them up. They go back to her house. However, her house has fallen down into a big sinkhole.
Oh, yeah.
And she goes back down there to live for all practical purposes, it seems. And it's just really strange and wild. And so that's basically the setup of the Flamingo Diamond. Now, the title, The Flamingo Diamond, comes from something that happens on the train where a rich lady is traveling on the train, and she claims that someone has stolen a very expensive piece of jewelry, which is basically, a flamingo with diamonds all around it.
Right.
Either a flamingo with diamonds all around it or a diamond in the shape of a flamingo. I'm not sure which. But anyway, it's something that's supposed to be very expensive. And so there just happens to be a famous, so to speak, detective on the train, and he is in search of the individual who stole the Flamingo Diamond.
That's right. The great detective Arturo Hasquantel.
Right. And we will see him in The Claw in the second part. So now The Claw is the book that came out last year. Claw, The Terrible, Beautiful Claw. And it basically picks up where Flamingo Diamond left off.
Right. Because on the train, Raymond Ray met an artist named Nora who said he had an interesting face and she wanted to paint him. So he goes to her.
Or he has an interesting shape.
Interesting shape. That's it. So he goes to her house in this second issue and she paints him basically. But her house is a very unique kind of place, too. It's like a giant estate run by Nora's mother, who's getting up in years.
I don't know if it's run by her anymore or if the daughter runs it. But the mother's become a bit of a recluse, it seems. Right.
It seems like she's calling the shot, or at least, she's there to be taken care of. And there's all kinds of weird groundkeepers who say kind of these weird asides and try to get Raymond Ray to meet them in strange places in the middle of the night because, you never know who's going to be listening or if there's ghosts or it's kind of unsure what there is. There's just something not copacetic about this place in some sense. And, it's unclear. I kind of got a vibe like, it's kind of like, it's not quite like The Shining or something like that, but, there's something supernatural. There's something, the help have been there a long time. I don't know if they're mentally all there. I guess that's the question, if it's supernatural or if it's just, a whole lot of people kind of, going a little bit berserk.
Yeah. Well, in fact, most of the characters in this narrative don't seem to be mentally all there, maybe with the exception of Raymond Ray.
Yeah, Raymond Ray. Well,
he seems to be the one that's the most balanced. But in The Claw, we also pick up on the story of his daughter,
right,
and what happens to her, because it starts off, at least in The Claw, her storyline. She's down in the sinkhole house, and then this big bird comes down and starts cawing at her, and then takes her head in his beak. And then flies off with her. And it's what happens once she's carried away by this big bird. It sounds weird, and it is in many ways.
Yeah. But I kind of liked that, too, because it had this kind of, this one is, definitely like kind of a interesting narrative. Like, I'm really intrigued by where these things are going. It being called The Case of the Flamingo Diamond, or it's not called The Case of the Flamingo Diamond, but that kind of setup is funny. And, and the daughter just happens to run into Arturo Hasquantel.
You like to say that name, don't you?
I do. It's just a hilarious name. And he's ridiculous because he's so, when he talks, he's like very self-important. And, he's sure to tell everybody just how important and big he is. And also how close he is to breaking that Flamingo Diamond case. And I'm wondering why he's all over. Like, he just seems to be in random places throughout.
Yeah, which kind of adds to the creepy factor.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, what are you doing out there on a horse in the middle of this forest underneath this giant bird nest?
Now, see if you agree with me on this. I think with Pearson's The Claw, and you could say the same thing about Flamingo Diamond, the previous book. Mm-hmm. This is one of the more traditional comics, I think, of those that we're going to be discussing on the Glom Press Spotlight. And what I mean by that is that, okay, so when we were talking about Mystical Boy Scout, that narrative is set up usually, I think, no more than 2 panels per page.
Right.
Sometimes maybe even 1 image per page. But what Pearson does in The Claw and then in the Flamingo Diamond is he uses a more traditional 9-panel grid.
Right.
Right. And also the storyline, I think, is, and this is something that you were mentioning just a second ago, it's a more involved storyline. It's something with multiple strands because you know, we have the story of Nora, we have the story of Raymond, his daughter.
Right.
And so there are various things that are going on here. And so it just strikes me as a very different kind of comic from not all, but most of the others that they published last year.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder too. I mean, I'm assuming this because, like you said, it looks like these are risographs that have been scanned and made into PDF form, and I was always playing around with the sizes of these things, but the Flamingo Diamond ones are the biggest. And I'm wondering if these are almost, they're bigger than comic, like American floppy superhero comic. Like these seem to be bigger. If I'm going by what the screen, resolution is. So these two seem to be bigger, whereas the other ones seem to be more in line with what I consider more traditional, mini comic size. And these aren't mini comic because they're, they have a lot of pages. Some of them are, 100, 150 pages long. But they're almost like a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper folded in half kind of, like size. So like you said, those ones have maybe 2 panels per page, whereas this one, the 9x9 is, kind of like traditional. Like, the story is not, I wouldn't say the story is very traditional, but the story format is.
Right. But let's say in contrast to Mystical Boy Scout,
right?
It's not as wild and freewheeling.
Right.
There seems to be something a little more restrained about it, and I mean that in a very positive way. I mean, I enjoyed Mystical Boy Scout, but I have to tell you, I was really engaged with what's going on in these Flamingo Diamond stories, both the the first book, Flamingo Diamond, and then The Claw that came out last year. Yeah. So I'm fascinated by this narrative, and I wonder where things are going to be going with the next installment, because it leaves off at a very interesting place. So.
Right.
Raymond's daughter ends up again. I mean, she's kind of lost in many ways. She's not the only character in this narrative that's lost. And so she ends up at a diner, and there she meets a captain of a boat who is looking for someone who will clean the boat, but also, in essence, entertain him.
Right. Be good company.
Right. Be good company. And so at one point, she tells him that, she had been a comedian in the past. And he says, "Oh, a comedian. That's good.
Yeah.
I need a critical thinker too." And she says, "I'm definitely a critical thinker." He says, "Wow, a critical thinker and a comedian."
Yeah. But he also tells her kind of what she's getting into, because he's like, because they're talking about the last guy he just interviewed, and he's like, he would have got sick of me. I'm a nasty, trashy shit pile. Yeah,
and then and where The Claw leaves off is basically, I guess, right before she sets sail.
Right, and that's kind of I'm following up with what you said. I think that this is also kind of, it's got its kind of
quirkiness,
interesting, quirky thing, but it is more bounded than the Mystical Boy Scout in terms of its logic or its internal logic. But this kind of struck me not in any way other than the kind of like the sensibility of being really similar to Ed the Happy Clown that the Chester Brown Yummy Fur, the thing that he ran serially and
I
Yummy
love
Fur.
Ed the Happy Clown.
I do too. It's one of my favorite things, and it's one of the first things I read that really got me into alternative comics. Is I was like, "What is this, and how is it?" Because this to me has that similar kind of, I don't know what's going on. There's some really strange things that are happening. It makes sense, but it's also kind of out there in a way that, is pushing some kind of boundaries. But it's got some weird other, like, more traditional storytelling tropes, like the detective being there. So it's kind of like that kind of grounds it in a weird, like, it's weird and kind of surreal in itself, but it's also strangely grounding because that's like a very familiar storytelling trope that kind of happens in here. So it's almost like, it's almost like a mashup of, 3 or 4 different kinds of genres that all kinds of go in different directions and take different twists that aren't typical of the genre, but together, I don't know, it all works. And like, I love how these things have been coming together and how they kind of intermingle these narratives and push me to think or, be entertained or something in a different way.
Huh. I have to tell you, I had not thought of Ed the Happy Clown when I was reading both the Flamingo Diamond and the Claw, but it makes sense now that you say it, because there is this kind of strange haphazardness to the narrative that at the same time seems to make sense if you just, sit back and not try to analyze it too much at first.
Yeah, yeah, and I love it. I don't mean this in any kind of derivative way. It's just it's a similar sensation for me in reading it, and I that to me that's a high compliment because that's one of my favorite comics I've ever read. So if this is kind of moving me in that way, I'm all for it. I want more Flamingo Diamond.
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking about different modes of narrative, right? In terms of the comics, do you have 2 images per page, 1 per page? Do you have a traditional 9-panel grid? Maybe it would be a good time now to look at Psychic Hotline by Lonnie Braley.
Okay.
Because I think that's a completely different kind of storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
And here we have a narrative that is over 160 pages long.
Right.
So I remember when I first started reading this, I thought, "Oh my God, is this gonna take me a long time?" It doesn't, because basically every quote unquote panel is a page. Right.
And some of them are just images that kind of are repeated or they develop over, as you flip through it, like you get different close-ups or angles of certain things.
Right. And this is, I guess it's kind of a straightforward story. Basically, you have a woman who is, as she describes herself, it's my job to know the exact, she's a psychic. Right? She's a hotline psychic, thus the title. She says, "It's my job to know the exact thing that is wrong with someone before they even said anything. Right. I have to know the exact right thing to say and how to say it without triggering any of their trauma and providing the maximum amount of comfort and reassurance. It's a government organization," this is in Australia, "where we call members of the public at random and offer them psychic advice if they feel they need it." And so that's basically the setup of, I guess, one of the protagonists. Right. Now, there's another protagonist in this narrative. How do we describe it? Or it?
It looks kind of like a ghost.
It's a ghost. Yeah, it's a ghost, plain and simple. And it's a ghost that seems to be down, depressed, not too sure of itself. And so every now and again, the ghost will call in and talk with this hotline psychic about what's going on. And so, in fact, she becomes more of a counselor than a psychic.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm thinking on page 29, like I'm doomed to wander.
PDF.
29 to the PDF, with the ghost is saying, "I feel like I'm doomed to wander the planet completely alone for all eternity." And she just says, "Right." Like she's listening. Okay, first off, I'll let you know that is 100% not true. And then she keeps going back to the father. I think this is about your father more than anything else. That to me got to be kind of funny in a way.
Yeah.
Because it was, the ghost does not think that is the case at all. But, the psyche that's her point the whole time.
Right. And we don't know much about, I don't even know if we know her name, the woman who's on the end of the psychic hotline. But we get to know a little bit about her primarily through her baths because
right.
Every now and again throughout this text, we'll see her kind of sitting. She looks forlorn in her bathtub, just sitting there soaking. And her dog is right there beside her. And he thinks every now and again, oh, baby girl, poor girl.
Right.
What are you thinking about? And so, he cares for her.
Right.
And then we get every now and again, a series of pages of the ghost who seems to be, again, kind of gloomy, forlorn. How do we know that a ghost is depressed and down? He has droopy eyes. Oh, yeah. So and another thing is he feels that he needs a cane to move about. Yeah. So we have a droopy-eyed ghost with a cane.
Yeah, that's rough for a ghost.
Yeah. Who calls the psychic hotline.
That's right. And then there's kind of the joke like, you think that the psychic hotline will call you. But then the shape of the ghost kind of, I don't know, I guess it was towards the end too. It's like, I didn't know if the ghost turned into a rock or not. That makes sense. Because there's kind of like this image repeating thing at the end.
There is, and it's not just at the end, but we get a little bit of this at the beginning and somewheres in the middle.
Yeah.
There is an association of the ghost with the land in various ways. Sometimes he appears like a rock, as you pointed out. At other times, it seems like the ghost sinks into the earth.
Right.
Almost in a way that like fertilizes the land. Because we see, I don't know what it is, but some growths coming up from the land.
Yeah, and I think that is it the father that's a farmer?
Yeah. That's supposedly, yeah.
Yeah, because we get panels about that too.
And again, as you pointed out, the psychic hotline woman keeps coming back to the father.
Yeah, yeah. And about how the father had certain issues and, how those things might have played out, like you said. But then, then that kind of gets serious. And then you get to, the dog, the dog reassuring her in the bathtub. So there's lots of that too. And, I liked the visual, the aesthetic of this, because it's very minimal. Like the lines in this, like each character is, a very few combination of lines. The psychic is like basically squiggly hair, a very simple face and, a very simple body. And the ghost is like a sheet with two eyes.
Yeah. And, another thing about Braley's art that I really enjoyed is the fact that, the simplicity, as you pointed out, but also with many of the characters, there's a kind of incomplete sweepiness to it. And what I mean by that is the way that Braley illustrates, she uses a lot of curves, but they're curves that don't connect one line to the other, but there's no ambiguity as to what she's drawing, right? So, the man, the psychic hotline woman. So there's something, I don't know, rather compelling about that art style.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. It was something that I really enjoyed reading too, because it was raw but interesting. And then she repeats kind of geometric shapes and flips through them. And the effect I got kind of scrolling through it on the PDF is that it almost acted like a flip book in some sense, because she repeats certain things or starts to close up over pages. And I found that if I just scrolled through it quickly, not that I was trying to read through it quick, but it was kind of this thing that happened. And I was like, oh, it kind of looks like almost like a flip book sort of, which I like that I don't know how it works as a physical copy, but as a online copy, we often, I don't know, talk about, reviewing things, reading it online versus reading it in print. And, this happy accident that, usually I much prefer the print, but this, there was a different, I don't know, effect that came through reading it online.
Mm-hmm. Or reading it digitally, you mean?
Digitally, yes, yeah. Digitally. That's what I mean. Thank you. That's not the same. Online and digital are not the same.
So where do you want to go after Psychic Hotline?
Well, for me, like a good contrast one would be the sexy female murderesses.
Yeah. And first, the reason I'm laughing is I think the very concept of a book or a comic on sexy female murderesses.
Oh yeah.
Is just hilarious. And this is by Eloise Grills. And by the way, Mark wanted us to mention that Eloise Grills has signed a 2-book deal with another Australian publisher, Braley Books.
Okay.
So congratulations, Eloise Grills.
That's awesome. Yeah. And this is, I will say, an illustrated guide, but it's not a how-to guide. So please don't think it's like something like that.
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah. And that's what cracked me up too, actually, because at the beginning, I don't know if you read through that first page. I think there was the dedication. Mm-hmm. Now, she didn't dedicate it to anybody because she didn't want anyone to think that they were a murderer or that she plans to murder them, which kind of plays into the whole thing about this book because, it's definitely about a morbid subject. But I think it does it with a little bit of humor, and it's interesting. It's also one of those comics that, I think largely each page is a single image with writing. So, it's one panel per page basically as well. It's a little more realistic in terms of the artwork.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, let me pause there for a minute because you mentioned the publishing information and dedication page and all that.
Right.
One of the things that I think is worth mentioning is that I think on every book that we get is stated or written, drawn and printed on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, whose sovereignty was never ceded, respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And this is in every copy of the book that we're looking at. So, I appreciated that.
I did too. I'm not the biggest authority on Australian history, but I know that there's lots of issues with them and their indigenous peoples and what's going on. So I appreciate it.
I had to mention that. Yeah. Since you were talking about that dedication, publication info page. So, one of the things that when I picked this up and first started to read, I thought the title, Sexy Female Murderesses, it's not just female murderesses, but of course, how could you be a male murderess, I guess, but,
right.
But sexy. And so I thought, wow, well, maybe over in Australia, there's a history of women who murder who are just hot,
right?
So to speak. But that's not what Grills means by sexy.
No.
And we can, as you read through Sexy Female Murderesses, you start to understand what her sense of quote unquote sexy is. I mean, it's not just, the physical and even the psychological, emotional, but it's a willingness to take things into her own hands.
Yeah.
Even though Grills does not advocate murder.
She does not. And not everyone she talks about is a murderess. That's one of the things I thought was interesting too, because she's definitely got, what's it? Eileen Wuornos, is that her name? She's a famous, I know they made that movie Monster starring Charlize Theron.
Right.
Yeah, that's the
she even references that.
Right, she does do that, and she talks about how she was so much hotter than Charlize was in that movie. But one of the things I thought was funny is that I think in the latter half of the book she starts talking about Tonya Harding, which I was like, okay, I don't think Tonya Harding murdered anyone. I mean, kneecapping, I remember that. But, it's a lot of this is, I don't know. It's like kind of like a meditation on murder, but also kind of on gender and femininity and, the modes of murder available to women in a way. there's a lot about poisoning in this and how it's kind of, tied to domestic things. A woman's place is in the kitchen, it says on page 48, between the uppers and the arsenic. And it's like this kind of interesting kind of juxtaposition. It's almost like a visual essay of her kind of thinking through, these various ideas, kind of gender, murder, what's available to women. And then it's kind of like a self-exploration too. And she starts talking about her dreams.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to mention that one of the things that I was, nicely surprised by as I was going through this, I didn't know if this would just be, let's say, a list of one female murderer after another,
right,
in terms of Australian history. But she does talk about quite a number of women who murdered or who were accused of murder, but it's not only that, right? And a big part of this book, and especially as you get into it, is meditation, as you pointed out, but also self-exploration. So Grills is telling us not only her views of a woman's place in what's primarily a patriarchal world,
right,
but where she feels that she fits into it, how that makes her feel, and she positions herself within all of the context that she illustrates, literally.
Yeah. And it's frightening. I was just flipping through to the end too, and the end is like, ooh, horrific. Just her talking about, having a nightmare where she's 9 months pregnant, and then she has a baby, and then she's kind of like, I keep having nightmares about, where I kill my baby. And then, kind of the last line of the thing is that, in a weird way, not in a weird way, just in a way, having a baby is one of the few times that she is in control. She's like, and can exercise it. And it, that last line with those kind of fiery eyes or wonky eyes, I am in control. It's like, oh,
right.
Like,
and there's something very empowering about the end, though.
Yeah. It's a little of both. It's like, that's what I like about this book, is it's kind of like this, it's tinged with the horrific, but it's also kind of, it's an intellectual kind of, like I said, like a meditation or it's a visual essay in a way. It's
right, exactly. And everything she's gone through, the listing of the various murderesses, her reflections on the place of women in society,
right,
her own thoughts, Tanya Harding, all of that,
right,
leads her to where she comes at the very end. And you mentioned that dream about the baby and being empowered and in control.
Yeah, and it kind of I think a lot of it is about how also historically or culturally, women taking power is almost always transgressive in some manner. And that's kind of an interesting, maybe murder clearly being one of the more extreme, instances of transgression. But, I just think thinking through that, there's a lot to take in here and a lot to think about. And, I thought it was going to be, like you said, like a whole, there was a part of me I was like, okay, this is just going to be like a list of, here's Eileen Warros, here's this person, here's that person, and it didn't do that. And I this one to me was also, this was the other one I was thinking about when you first said, which one do you want to start off with that kind of took you in places? Like this one and the Mystical Boy Scout were the ones that kind of, to me, were kind of the most way out there in a sense about, just beyond what I was expecting to read, if that makes sense.
Well, I think this one, Sexy Female Murderesses, has in many ways a lot of similarities to another one that Glom published last year, and that is Guidebook to Queer Jewish Spirituality. Yeah. Not because there's anything murderous about queer Jewish spirituality, but it comes back to what we were talking about a second ago, this sense of control and empowerment. Right. And this is by, I don't know if I think it would be pronounced Myra Schlossberg, not Mira. Sure. I'm not certain. But there is something empowering in what Schlossberg is attempting to do here. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the longer texts that Glom published last year. And so basically what this is a series of comics and essays.
Right.
In fact, there are a couple of essays here where the author In fact, at the very beginning, there's quite a long essay where the author basically tells us what they are attempting to do here. Schlossberg is Jewish. Schlossberg also feels non-binary. And Schlossberg is wondering, what's the place of those who identify with queer identity in one form or another within the Jewish community? And so what Schlossberg does throughout the text is we get a variety of interviews that he does with, younger individuals, their own age, or a rabbi in one case. In order to try to answer this question, what is it about spirituality and Jewishness, or spirituality, queerness, and Jewishness that may or may not go together for some people? Mm-hmm. And so Schlossberg argues that they're kind of rubbing up against traditional, in this case Jewish, patriarchal culture. So where is our space? Schlossberg is asking. And so that's why I kind of linked this in the Sexy Female Murderesses book, because there is a sense of empowerment in this project. Yeah,
and I think they're both essay form in a sense. This one, I think, almost like a research project. This is, it has references at the end, and it's broken up kind of like, it's not even broken up kind of. It's broken up by interview. So to me, as a person who does qualitative research and interviews people as part, of other stuff that I have to publish, I was reading this fascinated, this is a nice piece of qualitative research done in a different way. And this one was one of those books that, this was dense, much more dense than the other ones, and not something like light reading. It was, I found myself with this, I really had to put time in, and it was not, I read a section and then I would kind of have to put it aside and go back to another section and think about it. Not because it was, difficult or obtruse or something like that. It was just that there was a lot to kind of think about, because I agree with you. It was like the Murderesses book. It was more like a meditation on, on gender identity, on religion, on finding a person's place in the world, and, getting information from various people, and then Schlossberg kind of mulling over the things that she's heard and mashing it up with her own experiences, and, trying to not intellectualize it, but maybe make sense of all the various arguments and ways of being in the world. And not everyone she talks to is very in line with what she's kind of thinking.
With what they're thinking, yeah.
Right. And I really, to me, this was a very kind of substantive and just provocative and a lot of like intellectually speaking. This to me was just a great read in terms of its substance to me. And, a lot of the other ones is, maybe the Flamingo Diamond and the Mystical Boy Scout were more great to me as entertainments. But this is just something really to delve into and think about, and, get people's intimate thoughts about religion and gender identity and how they kind of reconcile these things, and get multiple voices. It was something that I thought was very moving and, something that I think is hard to capture. And I really appreciated reading this in terms of those things.
Right. But, you mentioned some of those earlier books that we were discussing that dealt with more straightforward narrative. This is just a different kind of writing. This again, and Sexy Female Murderesses, they're attempting to do different things, right? Yeah. So there's not really, a story that's being told here, or that Schlossberg is attempting to tell. Schlossberg is much more interested in a more essay exposition-like exploration of identity and their place in their culture and in their chosen religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is one of the things that, I don't know if this is, I have not done enough reading on the Glom website to know this, but to me, even just going through all these books, I think one of the things that I got through reading, the number of publications, is that they're dedicated to representing lots of different kinds of voices, and maybe underrepresented voices and diverse voices. And I really appreciate that. I'm loath to call it kind of social justice work, because I think that carries baggage that, a lot of people like to pile on and, talk about political correctness being something, but, I think
political correctness is a boogeyman.
Exactly. And like the straw thing, so then they could dismiss it as like trite. But to me, these are very interesting, provocative publications as a whole. Everything we've kind of gone through, that kind of give voice to lots of people that, might not otherwise be recognized. And I really appreciated kind of, I don't know if it's the mission statement, but it seems to be kind of the trajectory of these works in general, is to kind of cover a lot of different topics and include a lot of different voices. And I really appreciated that. This book being one of the chief examples.
Yeah, I think that that puts it really nicely. I agree. Mm-hmm. So this is definitely something worth checking out. The Guidebook to Queer Jewish Spirituality by Myra Schlossberg.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll go somewhere.
Well, let's look at a contribution from another one of the publishers of Glom Press, and that is Michael Hawkins in his book, Saliva Tide.
That is exactly the one I was going to talk about.
There you go. And
or suggest.
I have to admit, I'm not sure where to begin with Saliva Tide.
No, that's what I was going to be like. No, for something completely different. Yeah. This is it's I mean, in terms of color, this is the most colorful one, even though it's kind of monochromatic. It's more reds and maroon and pink. And it's got two characters, Dr. John Stanley and Donna.
It's got three characters, doesn't it?
Does it have three?
Because, we have 3 parts. There's part A, part B, and part C.
Right.
And in part A, we get... I don't know if you'd count it as a character. There's this skeleton, at least in this section, the skeleton hand, and then later on we see a more fuller skeleton. So I'm wondering if the skeleton's a character, because everything comes together in part C, or the various characters at least come together in the C part, which is titled The Shadow Organs. Right. And so this is when, the aforementioned doctor that you mentioned is joined by Donna, and I think the skeleton is with them. Yeah, because we see, or at least the doctor at one point has this skeleton. So do you count the skeleton as a character? I don't know. And again, maybe what we're doing is trying to make sense out of something that resists sense.
I didn't know if the skeleton was external to her, though. That was my question, is if they were kind of talking about it as an external thing, but it was really part of her somehow. Like, well, it is external, but I don't know. This one was interesting in a lot of different ways.
Because on the PDF page 16, you see the doctor with the skeleton. Right. He's holding the skeleton, then he's hanging up the skeleton, and, he's talking about various organs. And so, I don't know, I got the impression that the organs that he's talking about, which are kind of weird, these are your shadow organs. Right. You may not have heard of them because they are secret. They've been used for millennia to chart human elemental the elemental foundation of human emotion, your internal weather. And then he goes through a list of various organs and what they do. And it's weird. I mean, they're not real organs that we as humans know. And so I was wondering, is he going to graft those onto the skeleton? I don't know. Right. It's kind of strange.
Yeah. I mean, he was kind of dancing with the skeleton. It looks like, like your typical, I don't know, high school, sitting in the biology classroom skeleton. And it sits in the corner there, for whenever the teacher needs it for demonstration purposes. He's kind of dancing and crooning with it too. That's that page. You said, what's 15 or 16?
16, yeah.
It's just a secret song playing in an empty room, or something. I'm singing it, but he's definitely singing with a skeleton, which is
wow, good voice. Yeah.
I've had a lot of Ricola today, so it's honey and herb, just making the dulcet tones come out. But yeah, that's I don't know. This was just a different. This one was more, how do I describe it? Kind of like an introductory kind of weird situation. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe this one. This is like the contender for also, which is the way out one. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, this is a little more out there, to say the least, than some of the earlier texts that we were discussing, The Claw and then Mystical Cowboy. You know, the thing about Mystical Cowboy, and I think to a lesser degree The Claw, it's kind of wild and freewheeling, right? And we talked about The Claw as much more restrained, more traditional in terms of its narrative structure. The thing about Saliva Tide is, well, first off, it's the title. It's like, what the hell is a Saliva Tide?
Right.
But it's a story, but it's a story that is shrouded in, I don't want to say confusion, but maybe an intentional cloudiness, because we're not sure what's happening from one moment to the next. And at least for me, in my reading experience, it wasn't until part C, the last third of this text, and it's not that long. It's only about 20 pages long in PDF form.
Right.
That things started to come together for me, because before that, I was just reading, sitting back and going along for the ride, unsure, especially after that first part, because I had no clue what was going on in part A. Part B was a little clearer, but then by the time I got to part C, the Shadow Organ section, then that's one of the things that Hawkins does, is he pulls together the various components of his maybe intentionally clouded narrative.
Yeah. And that's one of the things about this that kind of got me too, because it just seems like she's going through some stuff. And, you're talking about the skeleton on page 4, Donna is on a screen, and there's something in a bathtub. It looks like it's in a bathtub, watching her, and it's got a skeletal hand. So is that the skeleton taking a bath watching her? And that's the thing that made me wonder if the skeleton was her in some kind of weird sense, like Donna was the manifestation of the weird organs.
Right. And
because she's kind of struggling with reality or life or anxiety or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe another way of looking at this, maybe a more productive way, is to read this through the prism of dreamscape.
Right.
Because there are things that happen in this text that are very much like dreams. And in fact, when we're at part B, in Donna's section, which she says, I am a sleeper agent, or at least I assume myself to be sleeper agent. Sometimes I look for clues in the details, anomalies and symmetries and whatnot. For example, the swollen palm trees down my drive leaking a viscous sap versus the swollen palms on my hands leaking ? And we see her hands, and there's something seeping out of it. I mean, there's something very dreamlike to me about that.
Yeah, and that's a great way to talk about it. It's almost like this thing doesn't, it resists narrative logic. It just wants to kind of exist and put forth ideas and kind of, it does like variations on a theme almost. Mm-hmm. And so, it keeps coming back to things, or it's short, like you said, but it's also complex enough that it can present ideas and then kind of return to them in slightly different ways, which I think is fascinating and masterful in terms of, the space here. And maybe it's not, meant to be understood in a, traditional, straightforward manner. It's just, I don't know, something you kind of get in and let wash over you and, take from what you can, because it's got weird sci-fi bits and weird mystical bits. And, at the beginning I thought it was going to be, there's like a locket with a skull inside that little picture. And I was like, is this going to be some kind of weird, Gothic mystery? And, maybe it's got elements of various things, but it's not, as a totality, it's none of those things. It's just kind of what it is. Right.
Exactly. And you can tell, at least from this scan, that this is definitely a comic that has been risographed. You can even see the staples.
Yeah. I love that in a way. I mean, there's a part of me that loves, when I was a teacher, I wrestled a risograph. It was not as nice as this one, but that was like kind of my nemesis in the morning, a risograph machine. So, there's a part of me that I kind of, there's a romantic part about having a physical copy of the thing. And there's, I also remember just kind of the frustrations and the potential muddinesses of it. And I like it in this. I think it works, it just seems more clouded than the other books. But I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just it's aesthetic, and I think it's very suitable for what whatever this is saying. It's maybe not a straight up narrative, but I mean, it's just meant to be muddy all around.
Right. And Michael Hawkins has done a number of other comics. And again, if you go to glompress.com and go to their shop, you can get your copies of those.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, he's one of the co-publishers.
That's right. Okay, so if you will allow me, let me juxtapose or have us juxtapose Saliva Tide to something that I think is very much its opposite in various ways, and that is Rachel Ang's swimsuit.
Okay, let's do it.
It's kind of like last week when we were discussing, the latest Now anthology, and I said, I always resist the urge, or I try to resist the urge on Mike of saying, which story works better than another.
Right.
And coming down with any kind of value judgment. But I will frame it in terms of what seemed to resonate the most with me, or more than others. I have to say that Ang's swimsuit is the one that really did hit a sweet spot for me. And I think specifically for me, and I've said before on this show, I tend to prefer comics that are more realistic in nature.
Right.
I mean, it's not like I have anything against genre, whether it be fantasy, crime, definitely not crime. I love crime. Sci-fi or whatnot. It's just there's something about the more realistic narrative and the subtleties that go on among humans and trying to make sense of who we are and whatnot, relationships, your place in the world and everything that I really appreciate. So, and I think that's much of what's going on with Ang's swimsuit.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. This is more, in terms of layout and things like that, there's multiple panels per page too. And, this is like comics. It's realistic. It kind of follows, it's about a woman and a man who
a young woman and her friend, and they meet up at a swimming pool.
Yeah. And they seem like they're obvious, they're intimate, but their relationship seems strained to me in some ways. Like, I don't know, they hug, but there's like some awkward, like on page, 7 and 8, it's 12 and 12 on the PDF, 12, 13, 14, like they meet and he's like, hey, yeah. And they kind of hug and she looks smiley. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of go inside and, like there's just weird, like on page 17 of the PDF, he's like, it's good to see you. And he kind of puts a hand on her and she kind of looks at him and then he kind of walks away. And
then once they sit down, he does make a comment about, he's seeing a woman now, and she seems a little surprised. Oh, really? And see, again, but that gets back to the more realistic nature of this narrative, right? I mean, just as in real life, we get just the tip of the iceberg of something that's going on, their relationship. We don't know what their relationship was in the past. We can kind of guess from various signs, visual signs especially, that Ang gives us in the interaction between these two characters, but we really don't know the whole story, and that's fine with me. I mean, I much prefer the ambiguity to explaining things. And so you're right. That's what happens in terms of the relationship between these two. And obviously the title of the story takes its name from the fact that they're at a swimming pool. And at one point, the both of them do go into the pool. Although for the most part, they sit back and talk and catch up and look at what's going on in the pool. And in fact, I don't want to give anything away with this narrative, but there is a key moment, and it's a tragic moment of something that takes place in the pool that has such an effect on her. We're not entirely sure what that effect is and how that may add perhaps a little bit more added strain in that relationship between her and her friend.
Yeah.
Because they seem to interpret it in different ways.
Right.
But again, even though we don't know exactly how it impacted her or their relationship at all, I like that ambiguity. It does affect them, and her especially, in some way. And so on the very last page, this is, I guess 70 of the PDF or 65 in the text, you see her, she lays down to go to sleep, and she seems to be underwater because there are all these blue lines above her. Now, she's not underwater, obviously.
Right.
But I mean, what she and her friend experience, what they witness while they're at the pool, has a profound effect on her.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things I liked about this too, is that there's a lot in this that happens visually, like you said before. There's a lot that's, it's in facial expressions. It's in the direction of their eyes. It's in gestures and body, and that kind of reiteration of the water at the end, even though clearly she's not in the water, but maybe she is. I like how you describe that, because there is that event that I don't want to spoil it either. They witness something that's. They don't do anything about it either. That's kind of the thing. They just kind of watch, and nobody seems to do anything. Like, just this event thing happens in the swimming pool that you would think somebody would say something about, and it seems to end, I will say, tragically. Just from the visual information I have. But they do, like you said,
it does end tragically.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Like, there's nothing ambiguous about how that ends, but he definitely is taking it to be a different, like he's kind of in denial maybe about things.
Right.
And she is more like knows what's going on. And I think it's kind of like you said, maybe emblematic of their relationship, or, how he's kind of oblivious or not concerned with certain things or not aware of certain things that she is clearly knowledgeable about.
Right, exactly. And maybe maybe we're reading too much into this, or I'm reading too much into this, but maybe that's the problem with their relationship in the past, right? Maybe she felt that he didn't care enough. And so at the very end, when they're leaving the pool, and it's clear that it didn't affect him in the same way that it affected her, she's a little put off by that. So in many ways, it could kind of underscore the way that she feels about him. And she may be even thinking to herself, well, it's a good thing we're not in a relationship anymore. But again, we don't even know if they were in a relationship.
Right. But they also seem, I think it's implied. That's what I kind of get to. They kind of have an intimacy that I think implies it. But there's also kind of this other thing where he is more, involved with online kind of personas, because at one point, he's like, well, where'd you meet her? Well, she's like, where did you meet her? And he says, okay, Cupid. So he's like online dating. And then after that thing happens at the pool and they're kind of walking, one of the kind of, trigger moments is that he just kind of says, they're quiet for a while. They're just kind of uneasy quiet. And then he just says, hey, did you see Kanye's tweet yesterday? And then she just kind of walks away like, hey, are you okay? And,
why the hell would anyone care about Kanye's tweets?
Well, that's, I think, kind of the kind of thing to this too, is that maybe she's, I don't know, it doesn't say this in any explicit way, but maybe she's more interested in I'm not going to say substantive thing, but something like that. She's like looking for something real, and he's kind of more flitting about and not as cognizant of like some pretty dire realities that are happening around him. And so, maybe that's part of this feeling too, it's like a kind of a weird, double, it's like a weird, what's that called? I'll come up with the word in a second, but it's like an ambiguity, is that she's kind of hurt.
Exactly. Well, one of the things you said a second ago is it's not explicitly stated. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate most about Aang's writing here is that we get just a little glimpse of a relationship and what's going on with individuals, one in particular, the young woman, but nothing is explicitly stated. And I like that. I think that's very effective storytelling.
Oh yeah. It's very concentrated. And it's like the ambiguity of feeling like this double feeling like this person has thrown me over. Also, what did I see in this person in the first place? But it's like they're both going on at the same time. Like, you know, it's like a double kind of hurt. And then, you know, whatever this event happened is that has to be traumatic to see anyway, let alone not say anything about, which they don't.
Well, on the topic of trauma, let me use that as a transition point to another text that was published by Glom last year, and this is Mandy Ord's Galapagos. And I mentioned trauma just because of, you know, the reference to The Walking Dead.
Sure.
Literally, I mean, The Walking Dead television show.
Literally.
Which is, you know, is a major part of this narrative. Now, you remember when we were talking about Eloise Grills, I said that she had just recently signed a 2-book deal with Australian publisher Braley Books.
Right.
Actually, Ord has a new book coming out from Braley Books.
Oh, wow.
And it's a collected year of diary comics, and it's titled When One Person Dies, the Whole World is Over.
Okay, that sounds good.
So if you're a fan of diary comics, then definitely check it out. And if you do just a Google search on, you know, Mandy Ord, O-R-D, and then When One Person Dies, the Whole World is Over, you'll find it. Or just go to the Braley Books website.
Yeah.
And I think I pulled that up. Yeah, it is theliftedbrow.com.
Cool. Yeah, this was a really interesting work here. And like you said, it focuses on, you know, the horror of The Walking Dead and these two characters. So one's watching it and one is trying to read, just kind of distracted by shrieking and groaning and splatter sounds. And investigates.
Yeah, there are a lot of splatter sounds in this comic.
Yeah. So, you know, she's kind of like, what are those awful noises? And, you know, then she's like, oh, I'm watching The Walking Dead. So then she's like, why would I ever be? But she said, there is no way you will ever get me to watch that. And then the next, you know, never, ever. And then soon enough, you know, she's watching it and she's engrossed. How do you kill, you know, like she's totally into The Walking Dead. And, that you know, it's funny and horrible at the same time, you know, that kind of you know, the ironic kind of, you know, like, you know, I'm too good for this kind of narrative, and then 2 pages later she's totally into it and invested in the characters and upset, you know, can't kill Glenn.
Yeah. Spoiler for those who haven't seen it.
Yeah. I'm a bad.
Yeah, that's okay. You know, if they haven't seen it by this point, then, you know, it's. Hey. You know, I think the spoiler expiration date is over with.
That's right. It happened in the comic book.
Yeah. But when she gets tired of, and actually gets pissed off with Glenn's death, and in fact, it's at that point that she screams, "Turn it off, the TV!" And she and her roommate, I guess it's her roommate, just decide to watch other things. And then later on, they get into watching this documentary on the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah. Have you ever seen this?
No.
I've seen the
Have you?
I've seen the clip that they're talking about, because it's that kind of horrific thing that she describes. It's the
snakes.
Yeah, the little
racer snakes.
Little baby iguanas. The baby iguanas.
A baby iguana, yeah.
Yeah, it's some drama. I will say this. It's about it came across on Twitter or something like that a few years ago. Maybe last year. I'm not entirely sure, but it's, you know, it's like that kind of visceral drama. You just see these little baby lizards pop out of an egg, and then all these snakes come out of the woodwork to, like, and they were called racer snakes because they're fast, and they just start chasing them down. And it's like a zombie thing, but real and reptilian. It's all reptiles.
Right. And it would seem as if a documentary, something based on real life, is going to be, especially after The Walking Dead, kind of a safe space.
Right.
For these two roommates to, you know, watch something and enjoy it together. But, and I don't want to give too much away, but our protagonist realizes that it's not so much of a safe space, and there actually may be more in common between this documentary or documentaries maybe in general, and then shows like The Walking Dead than she anticipated. And that disturbs her. Yeah.
That fiction and reality are too similar.
Yeah.
And they have a couple quotes that are repeated. One is what the lucky survivors can begin the unique way of life demanded by this hostile island.
There's that, yeah. And then where this ends up, and again, it's kind of ambiguous, but you do get a sense that she's been profoundly affected by this realization that, there's not much difference between, these fictional, horrific fantasies like The Walking Dead and a documentary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Based on actual film footage of real life.
Yeah. I'll tell you to Google that if you've never seen it. It's something that's on YouTube here, and it's you root for those iguanas, and it's not good for all of them. That's all I'm going to say. But snakes are snakes. They got to eat.
Yeah. Snakes got to be snakes.
Snakes got to be snakes. Zombies got to be zombies.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the final book that we're going to be discussing. This is one of the 9 that Glom published last year, and this is by Bailey Sharp, My Big Life.
Yes.
And this is a book. It's not that long, but it seemed to me longer than some of the longer page length text.
Yeah. It's got a lot of panels.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of panels to it.
And in many ways, this is kind of like Pearson's work, a more traditional manner of storytelling in terms of comics.
Yeah, it's set up on that 9-panel grid model, although sometimes, sometimes 1 or 2 are merged, so it's more like a 7 or 8. But for the most part, it's that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so this is the story of a young woman. Do we get her name? Am I forgetting?
I don't think we do.
And she's telling us about basically her big life.
Yeah.
And it starts when it begins this way. I was tired before I got 2 in the bar, but felt obligated to go. He was late, but brought me a hat, and he found it and put it on my head. It was cute. We got drunk quickly and made out behind toilets. Back at his place, I was absolutely happy and fell asleep fast. But soon a restless feeling came over me. So it begins when she spends the night with a guy, then she's felt restless, and then what happens to her life after that is based on this restlessness.
Yeah.
She says, I fell out of love before the morning. I crawled out quietly. And then she goes through a series of adventures that in some ways are very wild and unlikely, and in other ways seem like something that many people go through.
Yeah. And jobs. I think that's part of it too. She kind of gets these, like she takes a job in a bookstore, and the owner's kind of a jerk who
she
claims
describes him as a dick.
A dick, yes. Yeah. He was a dick who claims that he's read every book in here. And she's like, I didn't doubt it, and I felt competitive. So she starts reading all the books in the bookstore, and then he starts quizzing her. Or maybe not quizzing her, but asking her questions.
Yeah.
So then, to kind of prove that she's read the books, and it kind of gets into a consistent quiz until she gets sick of it for some reason.
Right. And then leaves, and then ends up at a bar. And then at the bar in the bathroom, she meets a woman by the name of Luann. And Luann seems to be someone whom she realizes later is not. And then
she seems to be a woman of means who needs a personal chef.
A voiceover artist.
That's right.
Yeah. And then after that adventure, she gets on a bus and goes to this kind of faraway place, and then sets up life there, goes through a series of adventures. And then until we get to the very end of this narrative where she condenses like what happens during the rest of her life. And I really got a kick out of this. She says, she moved on. I went to university, partied most nights, took an internship, had sex with my boss, got a job in Perth. The job was shit. Worked on a ranch, got caught stealing, learned to swim, lost someone, changed my look, ran a food truck, tried the kink scene, married and divorced, ran for local office, adopted a sweetie, I guess a dog, toured a one act, ran a book club, and it goes on for 2 or 3 more pages. Yeah. And so, she basically is telling us about the adventures of her life, her big life in essence.
Yeah, I love that part too. That was my favorite sequence in this book. I mean, I didn't appreciate everything else, but that, we talk about, or I've talked about, like, compressed storytelling or decompressed storytelling. It's like her entire life in like 5 pages. She gets married and divorced in the space of a panel. So it's like there is a whole lot going on there that I really like. This book, I like that too, because it's like you said, it was like this mundane series of events for the most part. I like the art because it's a very like geometrical and kind of cartoonish at the same point. Right.
Yeah. It is very cartoony. And it strikes me, I don't know, as I was reading this, and this is actually the very first book of Glom's that I picked up to read. I got the sense that something like this could easily find a home in, Great American Comics volume.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Mifflin Hardcourt. Of course it won't, because it's not American.
It's Australian, right?
Yeah. But both in terms of the story and in terms of the style, I think it would find a nice home and would be definitely a contestant for inclusion in Best American Comics volume. And where this book ends, though, and this is no spoiler in any way. I mean, she does, after experiencing all of these life events, especially those condensed at the very end, she comes to a realization that maybe she doesn't need all those things that she went through. Maybe living in a much more serene, calm, peaceful, non-active existence in terms of needing to do something all the time is the way to go. And then she speculates, where did all this begin? And it all comes back to that first episode, right? Where she slept with a guy, stayed overnight, and then felt unsatisfied and restless. And it's that restlessness that eventually led her to where she is finally at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like that too. It was like a call and return kind of story where, there's a setup, it goes all over the place. And then, that's like a picaresque kind of thing, maybe, where, that's this kind of thing, which I didn't expect. I mean, but it's like a classical story setup. Yeah. Although it doesn't look like that. It looks like something else.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of this as a picaresque narrative, but I guess you could make the argument that this is, because, with some picaresque narratives, you do have to wonder if after all the life events, the journey that the individual went on, if he or she has learned anything, and there's, kind of a big question mark at the end, was anything learned? And I think we have something similar going on here, although there does seem to be a realization that she does understand that it's what, happened when she was dissatisfied with staying with that guy overnight. Right. That led her to where she is now. And I even like the way that Sharp describes this. It's described the axle of my life.
Right.
So that event was the axle of her life. And so what started out as a big life turns out to be a big regret, but the regret, as we learn at the end, is all about the life that she's led.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it repeats that same image. I had to go and look of that open window that's in the very first panel of the comic, and it's in
that's right.
the penultimate. About that. I hadn't seen that either, but I went through and looked. So it's that's I like this. The art and the planning and the kind of execution of this story is just. It's got that mediation on life or, kind of philosophical look, but it's also got lots of quirk and humor in it. I think it's a good book for us to kind of end on too, being the final book we're talking about, because it kind of encapsulates a lot of what I felt like the other books kind of contain too, kind of unique storytelling, sense. It has, definitely unique character, great sense of humor, kind of quirky sense of humor, lots of different, I'm keep using the word quirky. But
I think quirky is a good word to use with many of the books that we're discussing on this episode.
Mm-hmm. I mean, these situations are unique. I mean, they're kind of mundane, but they're also very unique at the same point. Mm-hmm. And the storytelling methods are, varied. I love that, the decompressed pages, I like that the call and return nature of this story, and yeah, I'm glad that we both figured out that these guys existed in December.
So there you have it, our publisher spotlight on Glom Press out of Melbourne, Australia. Mm-hmm. We focused on their 2018 releases, and they put out 9 books last year. Among those are Guidebook to Queer Jewish Spirituality by Myra Schlossberg, The Claw, The Terrible Beautiful Claw by Mark Pearson, Saliva Tide by Michael Hawkins, Galapagos by Mandy Ord, Sexy Female Murderesses, Eloise Grills, Mystical Boy Scout No. 4 by Aaron Billings, Swimsuit by Rachel Ang, My Big Life by Bailey Sharp, and Psychic Hotline by Leonie Braley.
Yeah, that's easy for you to say.
Yeah, and we also talked a little bit about Pearson's The Flamingo Diamond that came out in 2017.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a whole lot of stuff to talk about.
Exactly. And we didn't know about Glom Press before December, and my guess is the vast, vast majority of our listeners have never heard of Glom Press either. So we highly recommend that you go to glompress.com. That's GLOMPRESS.com. Learn more about these guys. They do a lot of great books. They do risograph too. So if you're an Australian listener, hey, check them out. They'll do some poster work for you, I would guess. And they also have a shop on Store Envy where you can get the majority of the books that we discussed today. I think the only one that is sold out, and this is pre-order sold out, is Pearson's The Claw.
Okay.
Other than that, every single one I think is still available according to this website, and other things that they do.
Yeah, and there's some prior works that are still out there, too, it looks like.
Prior works, stickers, posters, things of that sort. So, yeah, they even have things like T-shirts, although those are sold out, I think.
Right.
Glom shirts.
Glom shirts.
Yeah, I want a Glom shirt.
Hey, well, if we say nice things, hey, guys.
maybe if they have any Glom shirts left over. I just like to say Glom.
Hey, Glom is a good word to glom onto.
Yeah.
Do you like that?
Yeah. And one of the things I regret about not having Michael and or Mark on the show to introduce the press to everyone and to us is I wanted to ask them where the name came from.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, we can ask Mark. We can email him and he'll let us know.
I like it. It's sort of one off of glam.
Yeah. So even though you won't be able, unfortunately, to find any Glom Press publications on their site, they nonetheless have a lot of great books and a lot of great deals, and that's our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com, and there, every single month, you're going to find some mind-blowing specials. You can't go wrong with those guys, right?
That's correct, sir.
That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about our spotlight on Glom Press. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can contact us the old-fashioned way by picking up your phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or if you prefer, you can email us at twoguyes@comicsalternative.com. Or if you just want to email me, I'm Sturge at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also contact us via social media. We're all over the place. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on TuneIn, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Podcasts, among other places. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
It's your one-stop shop for comics alternative stuff, period.
That's right. Okay, so Hey, your first publisher spotlight. How does it feel, Sturge?
I feel great. I feel refreshed. I'm going to go out and conquer the world right now.
Yeah. And again, we want to thank the good people at Glom, Mark Pearson and Michael Hawkins, for helping to make this possible. And a big thank you to our Instagram follower who recommended that we check out Glom Press. Without you, we wouldn't be doing this show right now.
We thank you very much.
Right. And if our listeners have any other suggestions for publisher spotlights, please let us know, keeping in mind that we deal with alternative, indie, and self-published stuff.
That's true. There's a lot out there. We don't know it all. So
that's right.
We just pretend to sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, we will be back next week, and I think that should be our February preview show, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
I'm all about sir today, apparently. I'm squared away.
Yes, sir. Ha, ha, ha.
That's right.
You're sounding like Ed McMahon. Or actually, I guess I just sounded like Ed McMahon.
I almost did a hey-o before, but I stopped. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop the Tonight Show references, and we'll be back to talk with you guys next week. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Sturge.
Take care.
Peace.
Hey, what happened?